Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Welcome, grief community. I am so honored to have this conversation with Rebekah Thompson today. She's one of my former doctoral students. And Rebekah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
So Rebekah is really passionate about Infant Loss Awareness Day, which is coming up on October 15th. And she's going to have a conversation with us today about what this loss looks like, some things to be aware of, and different ways that you can honor that day. Rebekah, do you mind sharing your professional background and a little about your personal journey that got you into this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I am still a doctoral student. I'm done with all my classes, though. And in that last stop before licensure, getting my hours, I'm doing an internship up at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, and loving working with the students up there. I just wrapped up my dissertation defense, so that was pretty exciting. Woohoo, right? Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's very nice to check that box off for sure. This is my third year of clinical training, and I've had a wide variety of experiences within that. And I'm actually going to talk more about my journey personally and then wrap it back in, I think. I had a pretty dysfunctional family, and I knew I wanted to be a psychologist when I was sitting in a support group at age 14 with all the dysfunction going on. And then my plans got put on hold. I got pregnant at 17 at the end of my junior year of high school, and I had my son Seth on March 7th of 2000 in my senior year of high school. And he was healthy, 8 pounds, 4 ounces, and just a happy little guy. Very suddenly, when he was 3 months old, he became sick and was rushed to the hospital. And he ended up dying from an undiagnosed birth defect in his intestines. And that was June 11th of 2000. And that's really what put my plans on hold. Yeah. And obviously I did not have the space to do any more education at that point. And I had a lot of healing to do before I was ready to pursue my education. Then fast forward a bit, and my very first day of practicum, I'm at a community health center, pay what you can model, and I was able to work with a couple who had lost a baby. Very first day, met them, and it felt like things were coming full circle. At that point, it had been 22 years, and I'd had a lot of time to grieve and heal, and realized I was very passionate about working with individuals and couples who had lost a child or who were going through any type of grief or trauma. And the loss of a child is definitely a traumatic grief.
Thank you for sharing about Seth with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for being intentional with taking that time to heal and learn and understand and move through it. We talk about here, the grief doesn't go away, it just gets different. And you still carry Seth with you and are using that to help support other individuals and couples going through that same kind of loss. And I think that's a really amazing thing that you're doing. So thank you for that work.
Thank you. And thank you for saying his name. I think that's something a lot of people who haven't lost an important person don't know how meaningful that is, to hear other people say your person's name.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like they're worried they're going to make us more sad. When really, I love when someone says my person's name. So I loved getting to hear about Seth today.
Thank you. Really Thank you.
As personally and professionally, infant loss is deeply painful and can be an often misunderstood experience. Do you feel comfortable sharing a bit about what infant loss encompasses and maybe some of the different emotions that parents can experience when they're in that type of grief?
Yeah, definitely. As you would expect, it's a deeply painful and surreal experience. I think when you lose anybody, it can feel like things aren't real for a while. And I remember after taking Seth to the hospital, he got airlifted to Children's in Seattle, and we had to drive separately from him to get there. And I remember looking around and being like, everybody's just going about their life, and my entire life is standing still. And I feel like it feels that way for a very long time when it's a child. What you would expect with grief is definitely present with the loss of a child as well. I think one thing that is more common is maybe like that self blame aspect. I think a lot of people feel a sense of guilt or self blame because this is a being that you are in charge of keeping alive. And like the couples I've worked with, there's been a lot of what ifs, right? What if I had not laid my baby down that way, right? Or what if I had recognized the signs sooner? And so there's a lot of self blame that I think is really hard to work through.
I think that's such an important piece. The almost like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Like, what if this? What if that? I should have seen this. I could have done that. I would have done this
Yeah,
differently. And because it's one of those out of order losses, and we don't expect to bury our child, we don't expect to have to go through that experience. It feels really foreign. And I think that's where the spiraling of the thoughts, all the different ways that outcome could have gone differently. It's if we can just figure out what we could have done differently, then it's going to make sense when really a crappy thing happened, a horrible, the most worst thing happened, and it's not going to make sense.
totally.
And that's really
And
uncomfortable to sit in.
it is. And I think that out of order piece that you mentioned probably makes that feeling of it being surreal last even longer because it just doesn't seem like it's possible.
So, speaking of that, the complexity of infant loss, society really struggles to hold space for that complexity, the complicated emotions. How do you think we can help shift the narrative around infant loss to make it feel more inclusive and compassionate for grieving parents?
I think that's such a great question. I feel like our American society doesn't do grieving very well at all in general.
Mhm.
But I think when it comes to the loss of a child, it's hard for people to wrap their brain around it. And so it's very uncomfortable when the topic comes up. And one thing is just talking about that child, like we mentioned already, saying that child's name. The parents, it's not like you're going to bring it up, like it doesn't go away from your brain for a really long time. And even once it does, and you have those moments of relief, not thinking about it, it's always there waiting to come back. Like there's always reminders, there's always these little things. And so it's nice when you know other people are thinking of the child or your human as well. One thing, just to tell a bittersweet little story. So, my youngest daughter, when we'd be in the grocery store, often the cashier's trying to make conversation, and I would have my two daughters with me, and it would come up a lot where they'd be like, "Are these your only two children?" I'm like, "Yeah, these are my two daughters." And my youngest would pipe up every time, "Don't forget about my brother in heaven." And it was the sweetest thing because it was so important to her. But it also, I'd see the look on the cashier's face of just, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to say or do right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really common where parents feel like they're put in this place to make other people less uncomfortable about the subject. And it's probably true to some extent with all grief, honestly. But that backwards out of order piece, I think just adds a layer on that where people are so uncomfortable. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I found myself many times, unfortunately, over the years, like trying to comfort other people when the topic comes up, or feeling like I have to say ahead of time, like this, I feel the urge to say this, and you don't have to know what to say. Like it's a really uncomfortable thing, but I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of being in this grief illiterate society. People don't know what to say with grief. We're not educated about it. And yet Most of us have gone through some form of grief, some lived experience of loss. We just don't have the right vernacular, the right language to say things in a non-minimizing way where it then puts the responsibility to make us feel better when it's like we're the
Right.
ones grieving and yet I'm comforting you about my like that in and of itself feels backwards. And
Yeah.
it's like all we have to say is that's really hard. I'm so sorry that you lost Seth or that you lost your person. Like we can just validate, like that sucks. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry that happened. Tell me about them.
Yes.
Leaning in and asking the question, what was a cute thing that Seth did when he was a baby? What do you remember about him? I think that's so lovely that your living daughters know about Seth and would remind the cashier. That's so sweet that you've brought him into your family story because he's part of your family.
Absolutely. And they never met him. My youngest says, Mom, is it weird? Like, I never met my brother, but I miss him.
Yeah,
And I had to be like, no, that's not weird. We can miss somebody that we feel like we missed out on meeting.
great.
Yeah.
So, in that same vein of not knowing what to say, what were some phrases or responses that you found helpful when supporting someone who has experienced infant loss? Yeah, just so that we can give the listeners some language suggestions.
I think it actually can be really powerful to just literally say, I don't know what to say,
Mm,
or I don't know what to do to help you, but I'm sad to hear that, or, and just express that you're at a loss as to what to do or say.
yeah.
I think that can be super powerful. A lot of times, I don't think it's about having the right thing to say. I know the most helpful thing in that week following Seth's death was my aunt, bless her heart. Like, she is such a sweetheart and just so caring. And she came to me every day for that entire week. She brought me food. She made me have a few nibbles because honestly, I didn't feel like eating, which is pretty normal, I think. Although some people end up eating more. So you never know. But she would make me eat a few bites and just sit with me. And if I felt like crying, she'd cry with me. And she just saw, okay, this is what needs to be done, and did certain things like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and go do the dishes. Or you have these pictures that you were going to order, because I had professional pictures taken 2 weeks before he passed, which I so value those pictures. And so she called up and was like ordering the prints for me and, you know, helping make arrangements. We had a little service for him, and she did a lot of those details because I was not in the space. And so I think it's just being there, being present matters so much more than having the right thing to say.
It's that showing up. It's because it's not something we can fix. It's just being there with us in it, however we're showing up in it.
Yeah, and listening, because sometimes suddenly you'll think of something you just want to talk about your person. And when you were talking about cute stories, when you mentioned that, I remembered this one night, because it wasn't long before Seth died that he learned how to laugh and would really just giggle. And I remember this one night we were in the kitchen and he was in his bouncer. I don't remember what I was doing, but the dog was just walking around and doing things. And everything the dog did, Seth thought was so funny. And he just kept laughing. Oh, and that's honestly one of my favorite memories.
Like a furry friend to make a baby laugh.
Definitely.
With thinking about we're in fall, we've got holidays coming up. When we think about navigating those milestones like anniversaries, birthdays, what can be some self-care strategies to help grieving parents during that time? Because it can be more emotionally acute and tricky, and there can be societal expectations around those times of year. So, what would you say are some good self care type tools or strategies?
Yeah, I think just having self compassion to do what feels right. Like you mentioned fall, and one of the hardest days for me was the day that Seth would have started kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I remember looking out the window and just basically sitting there watching all the kids walk to school, just crying, just bawling my eyes out. And it was like, that's what I needed to be able to be like that. This is something I will never get to watch him do. And so realizing in the moment, what do I need? What feels right for me? Do I need a distraction right now? Okay, that's fine. Do I need to just cry? Do I need to look through photos and spend some time in that space, feeling the feels? And what am I going to do afterwards? What feels right to comfort myself afterwards? Or even if you're like, I don't want to cry today, what can I do that will help me to feel comforted? Who's a good person to be spending time with? Or is there a favorite movie or a pet that you can cuddle with? What do you need today? I think that's the biggest thing, is just really examining what feels right for me in this moment.
Yeah. I think that's so smart. It's that coping ahead plan and the aftercare plan. Um, because there can be that buildup, that bracing for impact. And then it's almost like some of us white knuckle it through the day, and others we just let ourselves be messy burritos on the couch. And you just don't know what you're going to need. But trying to think through, like, in advance, giving yourself that thought of what might feel good. Do I want to be distracted? Who can I have on standby to text me memes or take me on a hike or go smash plates somewhere or something? Like, whatever it is that serves that need for you. I think that's an important thing to remember.
And then having compassion if you're like, no, now I don't feel like doing that.
Like, holding things loosely, being
Yes.
curious that, okay, this might feel good, and maybe I wake up that day and I'm throwing all of that out the window. I'm doing none of it, and
Totally.
we're going to go a totally different direction because that's what actually feels best for me today. So, for those listeners who may not have experienced infant loss and want to be able to show up for a friend or a loved one, what would you say are some tangible ways they can provide support, both in that immediate and then over long term?
Yeah. Great question. I think over the long term is pretty simple and straightforward, like just talking about the person. I love when somebody who is important to me, like one of my best friends or my sister, messages me, just texts me on Seth's birthday and is just thinking of you today. Happy birthday, Seth. Just little things like that in the long term, I think, are super powerful and helpful to know your child's not forgotten by the rest of the world, and being ready to hear stories. Because I think that randomly still 24 years later, I'm like, I just want to tell a story about this one thing that made me smile or laugh. So that's the long term. Short term, I just think that people don't understand the painfulness of it, or how long that intense grief period lasts when it's your child. And so continuing to check in, it feels a lot like within about a month or two, the rest of the world goes back to normal. All the people in your child's life go back to normal except you. And it feels difficult because you don't want to keep burdening people by bringing up your grief, but at the same time, it's still consuming. So continuing to check in, and also just saying, instead of like, how can I help you or what can I do? Saying, I'm going to bring you food. What day's good?
Yeah.
Or
What do you think?
I'm going to show up and do chores. Like,
In a free hour, I'm going to come vacuum for you or do your dishes. What's the chore you've been dreading?
Yes. Or even, I didn't have other children at the time, but I know another friend of mine who also lost a baby did have other children. And so it was really helpful for someone to say, hey, I'm going to come over and watch your kids so you can like shower and just sit outside and be alone for a little bit after. But knowing what can I do, or let me know if you need anything, that is really hard to process and actually reach out when somebody says that, versus saying, I'm doing this. You can give options, right? Would this be more helpful or would this be more helpful?
Yes. I think so often we talk about with grief, like the impact on cognitive functioning, and there can be such decision fatigue. Like, your brain is trying to rework its entire landscape post loss. And I don't know what I need. My world has been wrecked. I don't know what I need. And so offering a friend or a person two choices. Okay, do you want me to bring you lasagna or tacos? Like, I'm bringing you dinner tonight. Here are the two options. Which one would you eat? Like that, it makes it tangible and small. Hey, I have a free 2 hours. do you want me to come watch Gilmore Girls, or do we want to just sit and be quiet and I'll just be with you? But I'm going to be there either way, or I can go do your dishes while you take a nap, but I'm coming to your house. And obviously, if someone says, no, I really don't want anything, obviously respect the no's and keep reaching out. There might not be receptivity to receiving help right away.
True.
And so not giving up and continuing to try. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially because with the guilt, the shame, the shoulding of ourselves, we might not want someone to see us when we're in that most vulnerable self-blame state. And so that can be even harder to receive help and support. And we really encourage our people to continue to try reaching out, trying to show up for us in ways that feel kind and respectful, and
Definitely.
reducing that stigma around infant loss.
Definitely. And like my aunt showing up every day for a week afterwards, she didn't give me a choice. And she's basically a second mom to me. And her just showing up was very appropriate because she's a mother figure in every way. And I needed that, but I didn't even know I needed that.
Yeah. That's really great you have her.
I'm very thankful for her. Yes.
Rebekah, with October 15th coming up as Infant Awareness Day, I'd love to give listeners a chance to hear and learn a bit about that special day, and maybe also talk about some other ways parents can memorialize their child. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Definitely. I'll start with the memorialized part. I was very thankful Children's Hospital actually did a handprint and footprint of my son, which is not something in the moment of losing a child that you would think of at all. And that became one of the things that I put in a memory box. And I think a memory box can be really helpful just to have this space that has a lot of things in it that make you think of your child, but that you can put away when you don't want it in your face. And for example, mine has photos, his favorite stuffed animal. He loved Eeyore. Of all of the Winnie the Pooh characters, like that was the one he always reached for. And so his little Eeyore and like his favorite outfit, the outfit I loved putting him in, is in there, a blanket, quite a few little things. And so I think that's a really great way to set aside this stuff in this space where you can pull it out when you want to remember, when you want to think about your child. And then one thing that we do in our household is every year on Seth's birthday, I buy cupcakes. And I have this wonderful photo of him where he was sitting on someone's lap, staring at the keyboard while they were typing. And so I'm able to put the cupcake right where it looks like he's looking at it next to this photo. And so we do that every year, and we sing, and my girls blow out the candle. And so it's become even more important to my youngest daughter than it is to me at this point. So it will probably live on forever. So finding those little things that feel right for you and your family, I think, are really important. Those little rituals. And then we already talked about just having those people that you know are safe people for you to talk about memories when you want to talk about maybe the age your child would be, the stage that they'd be in, or the things that you're like, man, I'm really sad that he or she's not getting to do this thing because this is what they'd be doing this year, graduating from high school or what. Just figuring out who are those people. And then it is Pregnancy Loss and Infant Loss Awareness Day on October 15th, as you mentioned. And so that is a time where obviously we can think about our child, or if we know somebody who's lost a child, where you can also participate in this. And so at 7 p.m. across the world, people will be lighting a candle to remember their own or someone else's infant that has unfortunately passed on and died. And for pregnancies too, you can do this for lost pregnancies as well. And the idea is that there will be a wave of light going across the world for 24 hours if everybody does this at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. in their own time zone. You are lighting a candle and, if possible, putting it in a window and just letting it burn for an hour. And so that's one thing that I think is pretty cool and can feel very powerful.
It's a universal lived experience to grieve, and On this day, many individuals have experienced a pregnancy loss or an infant loss. I think that's just so beautiful.
I agree. I have been participating in this for a very long time, since I first learned about it.
As we start to wrap up, are there 2 or 3 takeaways that would be important for parents who have experienced infant loss to know, that takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah, I think one thing I think of is that whole idea of the waves of grief. I think it can provide some hope to know that, yeah, you'll always have waves of grief, but I like to think of it like at the beginning, you're further in the ocean and the waves are bigger, and every wave is knocking you down and they're coming very frequently. And it's almost like you get closer and closer to shore as time goes on. And so those waves become a little less frequent and not as big. And every once in a while, one will sneak up and it will knock you over. But you learn how to get back up faster, and you learn how to deal with these waves. And you'll always have at least your feet in the ocean, but the waves become easier and less intense and less frequent. So I think that's really helpful to have that piece of hope. Like, it won't always feel like it does when it's fresh.
Yeah.
It might feel that way for a while, maybe even a long while. And then also knowing that if you have a day you don't think about your child, that doesn't mean you love them any less. It means you're at that point in your grief where it's not consuming you 100%. And that's, in a way, something to celebrate. But I think that when we first have that day, it's really hard. It feels like I am not loving my child enough anymore. And you want to keep that memory alive, but you can do that and have days where you don't think about him or her anymore. So just those 2 things are the first things that really come up when I think of that.
Well, Rebekah, thank you so much for this conversation and for bringing more awareness to Infant Loss Awareness Day, October 15th. So remember to light your candles tomorrow. And Rebekah, thank you so much for being here and for being part of this conversation and for the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Heather, which feels weird for the audience because I've been calling her Dr. Taylor all these years. But thank you, Heather. I appreciate it.
All right, listeners, remember to be kind to yourselves today, and don't forget to light a candle on October 15th at 7 p.m. your time. Take care. That's all for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need it. And if you're looking for more support or resources, feel free to head over to The Morning Movement, where we continue to build community and normalize these hard, beautiful parts of life. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and until next time, be kind to yourself. Opening and closing music is provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, collaboration, or training opportunities, feel free to email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. And podcasts are also now available streaming on YouTube.